Okay, everyone, I'm going to call the meeting of the Land Use and Development Committee to order this Tuesday, February the 7th. A little bit tardy, and I apologize, and I thank you for your patience. We have our roll calls, and our first item of business is to consider the minutes from our, do we have minutes?
They would have been sent to you in the. Minutes would be from December 15th.
Just the stand-up, that's right, from our stand-up meeting on December the 15th, and entertain a motion for approval. Motion by Member Friedrich, second by Member Bell. All, did anyone have any changes or corrections? Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you. We have minutes. So our third item on the agenda is a recommendation concerning bills and transfers, which were sent to you by County Administration. Do I have a motion to put those on the floor? Motion by Member Abel. Second by Member Bell. Does anybody have any questions about the bills? Okay, seeing none. All in favor of approving the bills, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, we've paid our bills. Thank you. Okay, so the fourth item on our agenda is appearance by members of the public. Today we have, was it 8 or 9 members who have asked to speak. We had a request from the speakers to rearrange the order a little bit because some doctor's appointments. I assume it's okay with everyone. So I'll call these first two who have the doctor's appointments, and then we'll go in the order in which these requests were sent to us by email. So their first speaker will be Joyce Kay, but let me, as she comes to the front, let me read sort of a statement. So the administration has informed me that there are several members of the public who would have requested to speak before our committee. Before we begin, I want to remind committee members and members of the public that per County Board Rule 20-15I, the committee shall allow non-members 5 minutes to speak with a maximum total time allotted for appearances of 30 minutes. Also, per County Board Rule 20-13G2F, members may not engage in discussion with, address, or ask questions of non-members during the time allotted for non-member appearances. So I just add thank you for your cooperation. And Joy, if you want to come forward, and you can sit here at that spot and just make sure you hit the microphone button. Mm-hmm.
The bottom right.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. My name is Joyce Kay, a lifelong resident of McLean County. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on carbon capture and storage. This is personal for me because my parents both came from different McLean County farms, one in Lexington, one in Colfax. And this has the richest soil in the United States and possibly the world in McLean County. Please keep that in mind. Just the construction of the pipeline will pollute the topsoil and reduce crop yield. And sooner or later, the pipeline will leak and pollute the soil and air. Say no to this false fossil solution, which has an 80% failure rate from 2005 to 2012. The landowners would be taking all the risk while the big fossil fuel corporations take the profits. That ain't right. Farmers are rewarded in all ways when they use green, renewable solar or wind energy. It has been proven that wind and solar is what we should be using. Thank you for educating yourselves on the harm of carbon sequestration and protecting McLean County. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Our next speaker will be Marilee White.
Good morning. My name is Marilee White. I've lived in McLean County since 1958, but I was born and raised in Henry County, one of the counties that is to be home of one of the proposed carbon capture pipelines. I also have a cemetery marker in Kewanee, and I have a lot of relatives that are buried there. Someday I will be too. I care about Henry County, but I also care. Is that enough? Okay. I also care about McLean County because I've lived here for 60 years. In fact, I care about all the counties in the state of Illinois. Since I was a young adult, I have studied and tried to model my life as Native Americans because there's a lot in their culture that I really, that their culture represents that I really appreciate. I am fortunate enough to have adopted a son who, after I already got him, found he was part Native American, and that just enhanced my interest in Native American culture. One of the things that I like most about the culture is their respect for the land. In 1975, I bought my first house, and my realtor was a friend of mine, and we knew each other pretty well. And right before we closed the deal, we had a meeting to go over all the details. And I said, Dale, I have a question for you. How far down am I buying? And he looked at me real funny, and he didn't know what to say. And he said, well, I guess to the center of the earth, I don't know. So then I said, and how far up am I buying? And he didn't like that question either. But he said, I guess off into space, off into infinity. And I said, I can see that I'm buying the house because it's built by people, but I can't see that I'm buying the land. I see that I am buying the privilege of being a good steward of that land for however long I live here. I'm here to tell you, as Joyce did, that carbon capture is not good use of the land. The process itself costs more to construct than it saves. As Joyce pointed out, it can damage farmland, resulting in lower crop yields. It can cause pollution in areas surrounding the plants and the pipelines that are already usually environmental sacrifice zones. The CO2 pipelines are not safe. They can break and leak. I've seen videos and stuff. I saw some really good stuff on TV last night showing this, and it's just horrible, the damage, and what comes out is toxic to humans. Landowners in the state of Illinois have no rights about what happens to their land because eminent domain takes precedence. There are very few regulations, statewide or federally, for CO2 pipelines. The ones who will benefit from bringing CO2 into the state of Illinois, and perhaps even through this county, are the ones who will profit from it. And this is a misuse of our land that they're going to profit from. I would hope that we will take care of our land and our people. Several years ago, you did it in voting down a proposed oil drilling company from Pennsylvania that wanted to drill for oil just outside of Bloomington between here and Downs, and it could have led to fracking. This was turned down by this committee and eventually by the board. I hope that you will oppose carbon CO2 pipelines and carbon storage if this issue comes before you. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Don Carlson.
Good morning. My name is Don Carlson, and I am a 27-year resident of McLean County, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak. You're going to hear information here this morning about carbon capture, carbon sequestration, and the acronym CCS. And I just wanted the opportunity to tell you how I feel about it. I'm here to ask you not to open up any part of McLean County for carbon capture or the related CO2 pipelines that come with it. And again, as you think about this, no pipelines, no sequestration, right? You have to have a pipeline to get the CO2 here. If you oppose the sequestration process, as I'm suggesting, then there's no pipeline. There's no place for it to go through McLean County. So far, about $1 billion of taxpayer money has been spent on this largely unproven technology. And that money would be much better spent if we spent our time and our money talking about renewable energy sources like wind and solar. What I want to kind of underline at the beginning here is that none of these processes that you'll hear about produce any energy for anybody. They don't produce energy for any kind of everyday people. What the process does is it essentially is a waste. It's a waste byproduct of burning fossil fuel. And I don't think that my county should be the dump of any kind of waste product, much less coming from the state of Iowa, which is my home state. The companies that are pushing this, Navigator and ADM Wolf, and I'll note that Wolf is a Canadian corporation, want it for one reason, and they want it because there's money in it. They plan to make millions and millions of dollars off this process if they're able to achieve it. In the case of Iowa ethanol producers, which is where the CO2 will come from, they want to do it because then they can claim that they're doing renewable energy. But we all know that really what this is just greenwashing is the phrase. They have to burn fossil fuel in the ethanol production process to capture and compress the CO2. As they do in Decatur in the pilot project, it's not just hooking up a garden hose onto an ethanol plant and the CO2 just kind of runs out like a rain barrel. They have to, in Decatur's case, and it's going to be the case with the ethanol plants in Iowa, they have to build standalone gas-burning power plants to produce the electricity to power the process. Now, who of us would sit around here and think that we need to address fossil fuel burning by building more fossil fuel plants in order to address the original fossil fuel burning process? Who would think that? Well, the only people that think this are the corporations that are going to make a lot of money doing it. There's also another related point of this, which is oil producers. There's a process that's called enhanced oil recovery. And that's another process where you can take the compressed CO2 that comes from Iowa, you can sell it to oil producers, and then they can shove it into the ground like fracking, and that will help them produce more oil out of their older oil fields. Yet again, it's another example of simply encouraging the continued use of fossil fuel oils, and that's something that we just don't need. I have 5 kids, 3 grandchildren, and I'm here to talk about the protection of their future as much as yours and mine. As Joyce mentioned and Marilee mentioned, 8 years ago, Illinois People's Action testified before the Land Use Committee and the full board about the Menard Run company coming in from Pennsylvania that wanted to do essentially oil drilling and probably fracking next to the Mahomet Aquifer. And the committee made a unanimous recommendation to the board to deny the special use permit. And with a vote of 15-3 with 2 abstentions, the county board denied the permit. So I challenge you and respectfully request that you do the right thing again and close the door to bringing any kind of CO2 waste into or through McLean County. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Our next speaker will be William Rao. The speaker has provided some handouts that I will pass around, which you can keep if you like.
Okay. Chair Klein, Vice Chair Friedrich, members of the McLean County Land Use and Development Committee. Should Navigator Heartland Greenway LLC apply for permission to either place its CO2 pipeline through McLean County or inject CO2 into our sedimentary bedrock, I am requesting that you do what Christian, Hancock, Knox, McDonough, and Sangamon counties have already done. File a motion to intervene. Better yet, join Christian County by requesting your fellow board members to reject issuance of special use permit for injection of CO2 in McLean County. Here's why. First, one of the major risks of CO2 sequestration is leakage of CO2 from deep storage into groundwater aquifers. Since CO2 produces carbonic acid, it acidifies water, which dissolves minerals in sand and rock, including barium and uranium. In short, unmapped fracture networks in Mount Simon caprock or caprock above it could threaten the drinkability of Mahomet aquifer water. What worries me most is that fast injection of CO2 increases the risk of leakage, and with a subsidy of $50 per metric ton of injected CO2, Navigator is incentivized to do just that. Second, Navigator relies on technology with a track record of serious underperformance or failure. Archer Daniel Midland's carbon capture project in Decatur is a case in point. ADM's ethanol plant has emitted roughly 4.2 million metric tons of CO2 per year since 2011. Enter carbon capture in 2017. Designed to sequester 1 million tons annually, the plant was only able to capture a bit more than 1/2 million metric tons, 50% of its design specification, and only 12% of the carbon emissions from ADM's ethanol production. ADM's engineering consultant gives some of the reason. Quote, the ability to capture stack emissions and sequester them is likely 10 years out due to the technology and energy needed to separate and process the stack gas sufficiently to inject the CO2 in the sequestration well. Third, ethanol is blend stock for gasoline, and gasoline sales are headed for the basement as electric vehicle sales head skyward. Since global sales of EVs doubled from 2020 to 2021 in just 1 year, we are moving toward rapid and sustained EV market penetration. In short, both gasoline and ethanol sales are going to decline significantly and will turn Navigator's pipeline into a stranded asset. Midwest farmers need not worry, however. We're going to need every acre we have to feed the world's growing population. Fourth, pipelines are not a farmer's friend. When pipelines are backfilled, topsoil and subsoil can be intermixed and/or compacted with heavy equipment. The end result? A long-term loss of crop yields on the pipeline corridor. Ask Mike Kelly, chair of the McLean County Soil and Water Conservation Board. The 18 acres of his farm that were transected by the Enbridge pipeline saw corn yields drop from 200 to 170 bushels per acre. Other farmers have experienced far worse damage to soil and crop yields. Let me end with 2 words, cui bono, Latin for who benefits. Do McLean County residents benefit by allowing their county to become a garbage dump for toxic waste? Do our farmers benefit? Do any of our local businesses benefit? Or does Navigator benefit from a healthy tax subsidy of $50 per metric ton of CO2 with your taxes and my taxes funding this boondoggle? Also, will the fossil fuel industry, the most ardent supporter of carbon sequestration, benefit from greenwashing a so-called carbon capture scheme, which on closer examination allows them to profit by polluting? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next is Christina Deutsch.
Good morning. My name is Christina Deutsch. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to address you. I have been a McLean County resident since 1978, and my husband was born and raised in Bloomington. He and I attend St. Mary's Catholic School and have raised all our children here. My husband's grandparents had a farm that back then was located where Four Seasons Road is now. And as an immigrant myself, the first thing I noticed was the rich and beautiful dark soil that McLean County has. Back in 1987, the then Mayor Jesse Smart appointed a committee of 11 of us, community members, to address the issue of gangs who were causing havoc in our 2 cities, including drive-by shootings. We learned, among other things, that Chicago gangs were coming to Bloomington Normal to recruit our young men and women. In the end, we made recommendations to our mayor and officials and successfully eradicated gangs in McLean County. In 1993, the city of Bloomington was nominated to receive an award of excellence among other cities in the country. A delegation of 5 of us went to Washington, D.C. to receive such a prestigious award. What an honor and pride we felt for our community. So you can see our community is one that takes care of its people and its beautiful land, thanks to the valiant officials that run it and listen to its residents. Again, in 2015, our community arose to protect our land from destructive fracking that corporations from out of town, like Minarran, wanted to impose on our county. We successfully avoided what would have been tragic, as we had seen in other communities. Lucrative corporations are looking into new ways to inject the byproduct of producing energy by greenwashing, like gaslighting, communities with their unsafe practices. So if these corporations approach you in the future, it would be another attempt to use our land to be this receptacle for their waste, which would be transported here through pipelines. We all know pipelines burst. This CO2 waste and the carbon capture wells are the process they want, and we, the taxpayers, would foot the billions of dollars it takes. But what is worse, should that gas leak, so should I say when it leaks or escapes, our land would be compromised and our way of life would no longer be safe. The corporations pushing this are not interested in the health of our people or the planet. We already know that energy can be captured with wind and solar to provide plenty of energy without compromising our environment. We must think of our grandchildren and great-grandchildren to whom we should leave the land free of pollution and danger. Actually, it is our obligation. So let's get well informed and keep protecting our beautiful land, but not engaging in unproven methods and risking our beloved McLean County. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Andrea Merkel.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Andrea Merkel. I just want to thank you all for letting me speak today. As you can see, I'm an 18-year-old female, so I have my entire future ahead of me, including my children's future. Personally, I am going to be a 6th-generation farmer, so that means that this land has been in my family for hundreds of years, and it'll eventually be mine one day. And this pipeline is honestly horrifying to me because it's not only going to affect me, it's going to affect my children as well, and whether I'm allowed to pass down this farm to my children. In my opinion, this is absolutely horrible for the breadbasket of America. And personally, I'm asking you to just think of not only me, but your children as well, because there's so many dangers from this. There's asphyxiation. It makes your car engines combust so that you can't get away if it does unzip. And it'll just ruin all of the farmland that we see when we're driving out to Gibson City. So, I plan on living a long, happy, and healthy life with my family. And like I said, I'm just extremely worried about how this is going to affect us. And I just want you guys to think of your children, your grandchildren, and the people that will inhabit this land in the future. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Hunter Spencer.
Honorable can you hear me? Okay, I can't hear myself, so. Honorable members, I'm here to discuss the same topic everybody else has been discussing. The late Dr. Hugh Nibley of Brigham Young University stated that even the slightest taint of corruption, the tiniest flaw in a building, institution, code, or character will inevitably prove fatal in the long run of eternity. We, as human beings, cannot build anything which we can truly last forever. Any posed solution, therefore, is not a true solution, for it is not eternal. According to Genesis, we, as children of Adam and Eve, are stewards of the earth. It is therefore our duty, no matter if you believe in God or not, to care for the earth. If carbon capture proceeds in this manner, meaning the pipelines and sequestration, the consequences could be disastrous. My mother has a saying. She hates Illinois, but she loves McLean County in Bloomington. But it's going to be dangerous for her because she has a weak immune system. And if she remains in McLean County and this happens, she could be hurt severely. And I can't tolerate that. I yield my time back to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last speaker is Paris Roque. Please tell me if I've said that wrong. I apologize.
Hi, my name is Paris. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. I'm here just to talk about kind of the false solution aspect of the carbon sequestration. It sounds awesome. It sounds like, we're really going to help our climate change problem. But instead, we're kind of pushing it back more to the point where instead of helping our climate crisis, we're pushing it further. We're going to have this false solution that then is going to make it even harder for us to come back from our climate crisis, and that affects my future, everybody's future, in all honesty. And I think about 20 years, we're supposed to kind of go underwater, and carbon sequestration sounds like the perfect solution, but it's really not. It's, like Andrea said, if the pipes burst, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. They will burst. It's not going to keep the carbon enclosed forever. It'll burst, and that'll then, like she said, it ruins the topsoil, it pollutes the air so much so to where people do become asphyxiated and can't move. Instead of focusing on this false solution, we should move forward and find solutions that'll actually help, like stopping the use of fossil fuel, moving over to renewable energy. And it's just, we can help this problem. We can help the climate crisis, but we can't help it if we continue to come up with false solutions and just bring in things that are inevitably going to make it worse. And that's really all I just want you guys to keep in mind is what can we do to actually help instead of preventing it and pushing it further to where we might not be able to get ourselves out of this solution. Thank you guys for your time and have a great day.
Okay, thank you so much. So the next item on our agenda, item for action, is a request by TK and TK LLC by Tom Kirk in case S-22-09 for approval of a preliminary plan for the HDI subdivision, which is in Bloomington Township at 2148 Tri-Lakes Road, Bloomington, Illinois. This is a public hearing. Thank you. This is a public hearing, and so I'm going to ask the Director of Building and Zoning, Mr. Dick, to present the application and exhibits and his report.
This is a preliminary plan, which means that before these lots could be final platted, this preliminary plan is necessary to be approved. And then the final plat would need to be consistent with this preliminary plan in order to be final platted. It contains 6 lots. I distributed a staff report to you all. It contains 6 lots and a new street called HDI Court. This has been reviewed by the Bloomington Township Road Commissioner, the county engineer, and the county health department. We've had several iterations of this preliminary plan printed, and the one that's before you has been signed off on all of us. And since it's within 1.5 miles of the city of Bloomington, the city of Bloomington has reviewed it as well. Initially, when we started this discussion, the city of Bloomington wanted it to be annexed as part of the city, and they somehow then changed their perspective on that and decided not to annex it. But since it's within 1.5 miles of the city, they can apply their subdivision regulations to this document, and they've done so. And for your information, there's a waiver at the bottom that says they're requesting a waiver of sidewalks. And the city approved a waiver on one side, but the county doesn't have those requirements, but that's why that one is on there. I had emailed you a digital copy of the preliminary plan, and realizing how difficult it is to see it on a screen, I have the big paper copy in front of you if you have any questions. Jerry Stokes with the Highway Department's here too, and then the applicant and the applicant's engineer and surveyor will be here to offer testimony.
Okay, is the applicant or representative of the applicant present? If you're here, would you like to come forward and speak about the proposal? You don't have to, but you can.
Hello, my name is Thomas Kirk. I am the owner or part owner, my brother and I, with Henson Disposal. We offer residential trash collection and recycle services in the county. We're right next to the city. We're over by what used to be Tri-Lakes Fishing Club and next to Roanoke Concrete. Our goal is to change the property so we can later provide a different service to McLean County. I wasn't really prepared to speak, so I think I would do better maybe if there's questions.
The next part of the public hearing is if there are any county staff or agencies who've reviewed the project and want to speak on the project. Okay.
Jerry Stokes is the only one.
Jerry, do you have something you'd like to add, or are you just here for questions?
Not at this time.
Okay. So the next part of the hearing is if there are any members of the committee who have questions or like to speak on the proposal.
This is for Jerry or Louis, Yaki, and Brown. I was just curious on what the width of the right-of-way of the railroad is. Would you know that?
Let me see if I can pull up the plan. I'm not even sure if it's on there.
This is Phil Dick. Typically, they're 100 feet, and it does appear to be about that on this plan.
Yeah, that's what I would say as well.
Does anybody know the disposition? At one point in time, that railroad was going to deviate from its current path and connect farther to the east.
I'm not aware of any changes to the railroad alignment.
You know what I'm talking about, Phil?
Yeah, I don't believe there's going to be any realignment of this part of the railroad.
Okay. But there was mention of it in the past.
I think the city made an arrangement to have a railroad car storage moved from the area out here out to the area by Uten Elevator. That's the only part of the change that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I think there is some, with the city of Bloomington looking to continue construction of Hamilton Road.
Right.
There is some additional work that needs to be done to allow for additional storage on this rail line, but I'm not aware of actually any realignment of the line itself.
Okay. I just have one other comment to the Kirk family. I appreciate your recycling. What you've done in the past, you've been proactive in what we're trying to do, the direction in which you're going, and recycling. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, do any other committee members have questions for the applicant or staff? Okay, as this is a public hearing, I will ask, are there any parties present who have an interest in this case who would like to be heard at this time? I ask it again, are any other parties present who have an interest in the case who would like to be heard at this time?
I have a question, and I think it's probably a question for Mr. Dick or Mr. Stokes on Bunn Street, that there's multiple jurisdictions that have parts of pieces of that. And I would like to see who has jurisdiction over which pieces. And then my question is probably about the bridge that goes under Veterans, and who has jurisdiction on that bridge other than IDOT, and what implications there may be there. Thank you.
So the second question, the road, Bunn Street that goes underneath Veterans is under the jurisdiction of Bloomington Township. The structure itself would be IDOT, and they'd be responsible for maintaining that. As far as Bunn Street, where this new HDI road is connecting, is actually the city of Bloomington. So they're going to be the ones that would have to permit and approve how that connection is going to be to that particular part of the road. And then there's other sections along Bunn Street that are Bloomington Township or the city of Bloomington. I mean, it just kind of depends on which location you're at.
Okay, I'll ask one last time, are there any parties, other parties present who have an interest in the case who would like to be heard? Okay, so at this time, do the applicant or his representatives or staff have any desire to speak further on the case? Okay, no problem. If you have anything else you'd like to add.
I don't have anything else to add, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So I will now declare the hearing closed, and the committee can make discussion and make a recommendation to the board. Buddy, I would need a motion to put it on the floor. A motion by Member Bell, second by Member Friedrich. Comments or discussion? So I assume that the motion is to approve, or do we have a motion to approve or a motion to deny? Motion of what? To approve, okay. We have a second, as a Member Abel is a second. Any comments or discussion? Okay, all those in favor of approving, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, it passes. Thank you.
If you could leave the large preliminary plans here, I will use them to get signed, and therefore, we still need them. Thank you.
Thank you for everyone's patience. That was a formal hearing, so we had to go through all of those steps. Okay, so the next part of our agenda is items that we have presented for information, and I'd like to ask Dr. Skip Nelson to come forward. Thank you. So Dr. Nelson is going to give us an educational lecture, I guess, on carbon sequestration in McLean County. There are other members of the McLean County Board who are present for this. If you can't see, you're welcome to come forward. And when it comes to the end of the presentation, if you've got questions, I'm happy to recognize you to ask questions. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, so in advance of his, I actually have it memorized. In advance of his speaking, I just wanted to welcome Dr. Nelson. Dr. Nelson received his PhD at the University of Iowa a while ago, and worked at ISU in the Department of Geology and Geography for 43 years, and he's still alive. This gives me hope. Our students didn't get rid of you, right? And so Dr. Nelson has an expertise in particular in the geology, not only of Illinois, but of the McLean County and the sort of central Illinois region. And so he's the kind of perfect person to begin this conversation. So I thank you for coming.
Thank you. I'd like to do an overview of the geology related to the sequestration activities. And so this is sort of the outline I'd like to do, something about the surface geology, the geologic structure. Something of interest is the coal, a section of the geologic column that I call boring, because there's not a lot of interest right here in McLean County. Finally, getting down into the Mount Simon Sandstone, which is where the sequestration takes place at the ADM plant, and a little bit about the ADM sequestration geology. So we need to start looking at McLean County as part of a very large landscape. If we go back 2.5 million years before we had glaciation, a major river system flowed out of the Appalachians across Ohio, Indiana, into Illinois. There it was joined by another major river system, the ancestral Mississippi River, which flowed out of the Iowa nose into Illinois, across to the Peoria area, and then turned south and was joined with the Taze-Mahomet complex. And part of McLean County is in the area of this major river junction. Over the following 2.5 million years, glaciers numerous times advanced. The pink area represents the farthest extent of glaciation in the northern hemisphere. It made it almost to Carbondale. There's a variety of reasons why the glaciers advanced that far south. The pink area actually represents 3 different episodes of glaciation. The green area is the most recent glaciations, occurring about 27,000 years ago. And the darker green bands are mounds of glacial material called moraines, which stand up above our landscape and are very prominent features. In the process of the glaciers moving across the old landscape, it buried the river deposits and the outwash deposits into the Mahomet aquifer system. This is a map showing the Mahomet Aquifer System. The blue circle indicates the location of the town of Normal well field. I don't know how many people are aware, but the town of Normal is solely dependent upon wells in the Mahomet Aquifer, as are numerous other communities in Illinois. Now, below the Mahomet Aquifer, I should say into the Mahomet Aquifer, this is a cross-section that was cartooned based on the exploratory wells for development of the town of Normal well field. There were 3 aquifer segments identified. The lowest aquifer, the Banner Formation, also is known as the Sanconee Aquifer. And there's extensive literature on the nature of the water supplies in the Sanconee. 2 other aquifers, the middle and the upper aquifer, were identified, but are not as extensive and continuous as the lower aquifer. An examination of the water well fields in the immediate area of the town of Normal well field indicate that several farm wells have been completed into either the upper or the middle aquifer. It is also possible to drill a well out there and miss them all together. Now, to look at the geology below the superficial material, this is a generalized geologic map of Illinois, and the star indicates the general area of interest in here. I'd like to have you take your right hand, hold it out in front of you, and your index finger is now north. What you can see is a basin in your hand. And this is the Illinois Basin, and you can see the progressive color is in here as it fills into the basin. We are over an area that has wrinkles in your hand, which is part of the LaSalle anticlinal belt, and particularly the Downs monocline within it. As we go below the rocks, or below the interface between the superficial deposits and the bedrock, we need to look at several different units. The green area at the top is Pennsylvanian age. It consists of 4 formations, but I must back off a little bit. This column is from the science study of the Future Gen site. This site was never put into production. It was going to be a carbon sequestration site. Within the green area, the Pennsylvanian, there are numerous coal seams which do interact with aquifers. I distinctly remember drinking well water that was interacted with the coal, and it has a distinct sulfur taste. Below that are numerous rock units that have low hydraulic conductivity, and about a third of the way down, there's an area that's marked Silurian, Devonian, and something called the New Albany Shale. That was the source rock for oil in Illinois. It also is a datum that I will be using from one of the illustrations. But in the coal, it was mined here in Bloomington. I hope everybody knows that McLean had a long history of coal mining. This shows the area that has been undermined. The pink area is the Colchester coal. This is the same coal that occurs at the surface at Buffalo Rock State Park. And the brown area is the same coal that is exposed on the I-474 just as you cross the Illinois River into Bartonville. Now, getting into the bedrock itself, I'd like to call your attention to 4 particular sites. Site number 1 is the Hudson Gas Storage Field. This was identified in a series of exploratory borings conducted in the late 1950s into the middle 1960s. It is one of 7 gas storage fields in the Mount Simon Sandstone in Illinois. 2 other ones are the Lake Bloomington and the Lexington gas storage fields. The other 3 wells are wells that were drilled completely through the Mount Simon and have been geologically examined in great detail. So Future Gen, TR McMillan number 2, and ADM. I'd like to just comment a little bit about the TR McMillan number 2. It was being drilled as an oil well for oil recovery in an oil field, and with funding from the Illinois State Geologic Survey, the United States Geologic Survey, and the Department of Energy, they decided to drill an extra 3,000 feet of rock and core it for science. So it is a science well as an oil well. So if you go back to your illustration of your hand, from south to north, north being on the right hand of the screen, the Hudson Gas Storage Field is illustrated on this cross-section. It's important to note that this cross-section was done in 1997, so it doesn't include some of the new data on the Mount Simon Sandstone. I have projected in the location of the ADM boring. Now, this map looks confusing because it's done off of an automatic mapping program, and there are places where the contour lines represent 20-foot differences in elevation of the New Albany Shale. But what you can do is visualize where those color bands are really tight, the rock unit is strongly bent. So if you use your right hand again, now point towards your belly button. And what you see are a series of knuckles at the top. Those are the high points that show up. And where you see the lines running off to the west is where you've got ridges in the New Albany Shale. So the geology underneath the surface is rather complicated. Also shown on there are green spots. The one green spot directly south of McLean County is the Wapella oil field. And up at the top of the map, the yellow represents the Lake Bloomington and the Lexington gas storage fields in yellow. This is looking at the southwest corner of McLean County and the adjacent areas. All of the dots on here represent borings that have penetrated into bedrock. Most of them were looking for oil, except those that are associated with the gas storage field. It's worth noting that there are over 230 oil well prospects drilled or structure tested in McLean County over the last 100 years. So there are our 3 gas storage fields in the top of the Mount Simon. And this is the boring logs that were drilled. These were 1967. Vicroy Drilling Company drilled it and logged it. The gas is stored at the top of the Mount Simon sandstone. It is a porous zone. Below it, the sandstone is not quite as porous, so they can't put as much gas in. At the Hudson Gas Storage Field, the bubble at the top of the Mount Simon sandstone is about 30 feet thick. Each summer, they pump gas under pressure to displace the water that is in the formation. In the winter, they release the gas to heat your houses. The Hudson Gas Storage Dome is a major storage facility, and in, I got to get the right year, 1988, I can't remember the utility in Peoria. Anyway, they had to transship gas from the Hudson storage field to heat Peoria. In the process of exploring for the gas storage fields, they drilled far enough down to get into a tight area in the Mount Simon sandstone. They never reached the base of it. The electric logs that are shown here, gamma ray and neutron, are standard oil field electric logs, which can be used to deduce permeability and the hydrocarbon content. Okay, this is a cartoon of the ADM sequestration well. It is about 4,000 feet deep. In other words, it actually is 1,000 feet deeper at Decatur than it is here in McLean County when you get to the base of the Mount Simon sandstone. This is an as-built diagram. The one on the left is the total thickness of the, or the total depth of the well. On the right is the detail of the production zone. The cap rock is the Eau Claire formation. That is not the cap rock for the carbon. The carbon cap rock is actually at the bottom because the carbon dioxide is heavier than the water in the formation, theoretically, depending upon the amount of dissolved solids in the brine water at the base of the Mount Simon. Now this may seem like a strange aside, but these are the locations of seismic stations here in Illinois. The green triangle represents HDIL, which is a major seismic station in the International Global Monitoring thing, as well as the Plate Boundary Observatory and a part of EarthScope. The red triangles are smaller permanent seismographic stations that were installed in 2011. The blue dot is Decatur, which has 11 seismic stations that are not part of the global stations. It is strictly for monitoring the seismic activity of the ADM well. So this is what our plate boundary and backbone observatory looks like. This is 20 miles west of the ISU campus. And just as an aside, It showed, I checked all the seismic records for yesterday. The Turkish earthquake showed up quite strongly on here, as did the earthquake in New York. Now, one of the reasons for having all of those observation wells or observation monitoring stations around the ADM property is when you inject a fluid into rock, it's going to break the rock. When it breaks, it's a micro earthquake. So during 1 year of activity, so you have to look at this illustration here. On the left is showing the injection area, and I'll try to, on the left subside, all the way to the left, are the locations of small earthquakes during a 1 year period of time. Now, these are very low magnitude earthquakes. We're talking less than magnitude 2, in some cases down to magnitude 0.25. Now, it's important to know that earthquake magnitudes don't have a real zero value. It's like our temperature scale. They picked an arbitrary value as 1. So we can have less than 1, we can have less than 0, actually. On the right side shows the injection pressures and amounts, and the little dots represent the earthquakes relative to the pumping rate. Now, an important observation about this, all of these micro earthquakes are below the injection level. It is in the underlying material rather than in the overlying material. We don't know why. We do anticipate that there will be continuing microseisms, and the work that's been done suggests that there are a series of old fractures that are being reactivated by the injection of the carbon dioxide. So this is a general map of the seismic activity. If you can make out the little triangles, those are the locations of the seismometers to measure the activity. The circles represent the map locations of those earthquakes. Since the study was initiated, there's been over 2,000 microseisms associated with the ADM project. With that, I'll entertain questions.
Members have any questions for Dr. Nelson?
I have quite a few questions regarding CCS in general. They may be more appropriate for someone from ADM or a climate scientist, but I'm willing to ask them still and see if we can get answers. Okay. I have done a lot of research over this weekend, reading information from the U.S. Geological Survey and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and so I have some questions about the information I found and how it relates to what you've presented here today. In 2013, the U.S. Geological Survey released the first ever comprehensive nationwide assessment of geologic carbon sequestration, which estimates a mean storage potential of 3,000 metric gigatons of carbon dioxide. The ADM current CCS capabilities have allowed it to store over 3.5 million metric tons of carbon, and the pipeline proposed will be capable of transporting 12 million tons of CO2 per year, according to what Navigator's put out so far. ADM says they have enough capacity to store carbon for other customers looking to decarbonize as well, according to their press release. The EPA reported that the U.S. emitted 5,222 million metric tons of carbon in 2020. So based on this specific information, I would like to know if you can further explain those numbers. They're really big, so it's hard to visualize them, and how much of an impact the sequestration actually has on our carbon footprint when comparing the amount of storage space that there is possible versus how much emissions we're actually putting out, and how much storage space we specifically have in McLean County is the first question.
I can't answer any of those questions.
Okay. Okay, those are other questions about capacity, so let me skip those. Okay, I have some safety questions as well. Transporting CO2 in pipelines, according to the Congressional Research Service, is similar to transporting fuels such as natural gas and oil. It requires attention to pipeline design, protection against corrosion, monitoring for leaks, safeguards against overpressure, especially in populated areas. Pipeline CO2 may also contain potentially hazard contaminants such as sulfide or hydrogen sulfide, and because CO2 is colorless, odorless, and heavier than air, an uncontrolled release may spread undetected near the ground or in confined spaces. Therefore, the CRS says that CO2 pipelines pose a public safety risk, as demonstrated by a 2020 CO2 pipeline rupture in Satartia, Mississippi, which led to a local evacuation and caused 45 people to be hospitalized. I've also heard that these underground formations in Illinois may also be filled with saline, much of which could be radioactive. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warns that in addition to abrupt leakage from a burst pipe, gradual leakage through undetected faults, fractures, or wells that cause for elevated levels of CO2 to seep into the shallow subsurface of the wells can result in lethal effects on plants and subsoil animals and contaminate groundwater. The IPCC also warns that gradual pressure buildup before a burst can also trigger small seismic events. I'm really concerned about the 200 we saw there. The Pipelines and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, which I'll refer to as PHMSA, through the Department of Transportation, has oversight over carbon pipeline safety, including enforcement of regulations over construction, operation, and maintenance, as well as spill response. On May 26th, just last year, PHMSA announced a rulemaking to update its CO2 pipeline safety standards and a research solicitation to study the impact of CO2 pipeline releases. So I have several questions regarding this information. The first one is, are you able to tell us what the oversight process from PHMSA over these pipelines and wells actually looks like? And do they specifically have safeguards that you could share with us that need to be in place to protect against these overpressures and spillage?
I have no idea what they are.
Okay.
It's outside of my area of expertise.
Okay. Do you know anything about when, or anyone from our emergency management services that might be able to speak to this here, how will emergency forces, first responders, and 911 operators be prepared and trained to handle pipe bursts and spillages? Do we have the equipment and standard operating procedures already in place for responding to this kind of environmental catastrophe? And if not, what is that cost that it would cost to get us prepared? I've heard that only electric vehicles will work in the vicinity of one of these carbon spills. We would need gas respirators, protection against frostbite, and the plumes that come from a burst can go for up to a mile radius. So what is our current level of preparedness for this type of disaster if it were to happen?
So it's my understanding that we don't have anybody from emergency management. This is a lecture on the geology. So we can have that conversation for sure as it goes forward, but are there any questions about the geology that Dr. Nelson can answer?
Yeah, with the issue of the radioactive saline that could be in these formations, is that accurate that we do have radioactive saline in some of these formations, particularly in McLean County? And if that radioactive saline has to be ejected or displaced in order to inject the carbon, what would we then be doing with that radioactive saline, and what are any like issues that could come about with bringing that out and storing it somewhere else?
I can do a side on that. The city of Winona is the southernmost city, town, that is using water from the Mount Simon for drinking water. And that water, the radium in that water exceeds the EPA standard. So there is radium dissolved in the water in the upper part of the Mount Simon sandstone. There's been a study, actually there's several studies trying to figure out what is the source of the radium in the water. But radium is a radioactive material.
Dr. Nelson, is that radium naturally occurring? This isn't
It
a
is
result of?
naturally occurring radium.
Okay, so it's not a result of any projects?
No.
Um,
So I would assume that radium occurs in the Mount Simon under McLean County.
This one is about land fertility, so I don't know if you could answer this one, but did you say no?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay. These are about ADM specifically. Okay. According to the most recent report put out by the IPCC just last year, carbon capture and storage can increase the water usage of a facility that's using CCS to try to handle their own emissions by almost 50%. This is especially relevant in coal-fired plants that utilize CCS to reduce their personal carbon emissions. Can you explain how the process of CCS uses other natural resources such as water and electricity consumption, and what would happen to a CCS system if water availability were to be restricted in times of drought or for any other reason?
I have no idea.
Okay. Do you know if there are environmental impact surveys that have to be completed prior to getting the zoning in each jurisdiction where a pipeline or well could be placed or routed? Anyone?
There are some counties that are requiring a special use to have under their zoning to allow the sequestration wells.
Okay. And then I want to ask about the 200 micro earthquakes that you talked about. They're happening underneath the injection sites, you said, and we don't really know why. Evidence suggests it could continue and that it's old fractures that are being affected. Do we know how those micro earthquakes are or could potentially affect the wells and the pipeline in the future?
No.
Okay. All right. The rest of my questions are more geared towards ADM specific or climate science, so I will skip those. Thank you.
Do any other members have questions about geology? We can bring in future speakers to answer all the rest, right? But this isn't a hearing for Dr. Nelson. Yeah, Jack, please. You can, Member Abraham, excuse me.
How's it going? Kind of hopping off Crystal's last question here, or Member Abel's last question here, about the micro earthquakes. What kind of impact will any kind of alternate natural disasters have on a large-scale project like this? Obviously, it goes all the way through Iowa, hits South and North Dakota as well. If a tornado runs through there, is that pipeline all getting ripped up? What does that kind of look like?
I don't actually understand your question.
What kind of impact would a natural disaster have on a pipeline
Okay,
project like this?
What type of natural disaster?
Earthquake, like you mentioned earlier, or a tornado, which is pretty prone to the Midwest.
Well, first, the seismic risk of large earthquakes is very low in the Midwest. We do have earthquakes. I don't know how many people remember 2009 in April, an earthquake in southern Illinois. It was felt here, but the type of damage from that earthquake was some chimney falls down in, got to get the right place. I can't even remember the name of the town, but some old chimneys fell. That was, and that was a 5.3 earthquake. And earthquakes of that size occasionally occur in Illinois. It's much more likely to occur in Missouri or Kentucky. Iowa has a very low seismic record. I can't recall any that exceeded 4 in the state of Iowa.
And sort of tornadic activity would not affect the wells at all,
No, not the wells.
but maybe pipelines if they're more exposed.
Yeah, yes.
Does a earthquake compromise, let's just use the Hudson well as an example, does it compromise the integrity of the well?
No,
It doesn't.
it does not.
Is it because it's so deep?
It's because of the way the seismic waves move. The waves that we most experience in here are surface waves. That's the ones that have just, they're in the upper 40 feet of the ground. If I can tell a little story in here, the last underground nuclear test, they were concerned about the effects of the atomic detonation on Carlsbad Cavern. So they put in all sorts of instrumentation and actually had physical observers, guys underground, to document the ground motion from the blast. There was zero impact from the underground detonation. It was all confined in the, in other words, in the upper layers of the ground. So it would not affect the gas storage domes.
And it wouldn't weaken the geology between that and the point.
No.
So it would still be stable enough
Right.
that an earthquake would not cause leakage.
Right.
I understand.
So an earthquake only affects the top 40 feet of surface?
For the ground motion that
Right.
does the damage.
Okay.
I mean, if you have, I'm talking about distant from an earthquake. At the rupture site, if you have surface rupture, yeah, it tears everything up. But if we had a major earthquake in the New Madrid area in here, the earthquake waves would rock and roll and stuff like this, the upper part of the geologic column, but not deep.
Thank you. I don't know which slide to maybe go back to, but maybe the slide with the wells that had the normal water wells that you had with the, show the different places where the aquifer is? Or even maybe, yeah. Okay, yeah. So, because the other ones had all those different layers in there
Right.
and different things. So in this diagram, where would a well be drilled? How far down would it go into these, is it past the aquifer?
Oh, yes. On the left side, it has sea level surface elevation. So this diagram only goes down to about 350 feet below, or 350 feet elevation sea level. The sequestration wells are, well, 4,000 feet deep.
Okay, but then, so, and then below that is where the earthquakes are
Yes, below
happening,
that.
below that?
Yes.
So you said then it's the rock that's underneath that that's fracturing?
Yes.
Not the rock above it that's
Right.
fracturing?
Yes.
Okay, that was my clarification.
So 4,000 feet plus is where the fractures
Yes.
are happening. It's a long way.
And the ADM well is 7,000 feet deep? 7,300? I couldn't see the footage.
Yeah, it's 7,000 foot deep.
7,000, okay.
Dr. Nelson, could you tell us how leakage takes place between the bottom of that well and the surface? And what likelihood is it that this CO2 would go into the aquifer?
Well, the first thing is that CO2 is denser, so it goes down rather than up. Unless there is an absolute violent rupture where the CO2 would volatilize. But
How would it, if it would, contaminate the Muhammad Aquifer if it's going through it?
I think the most serious potential is in the drilling of putting this stuff through the Muhammad Aquifer. If I remember right, they're supposed to set surface casing at 300 or 350 feet. That may not be totally penetrating the Muhammad Aquifer. They would have to have surface casing that would maybe go 400 feet rather than 350 feet to protect the aquifer.
Do the wells that US EPA permits require them to go that deep?
With the surface casing?
Yes.
That's a county regulation.
The US EPA does not regulate that?
No, the US EPA regulates the depth that you can have a water well, but it doesn't have, set the depth that you would do a surface casing for a deep well.
It's my understanding that US EPA issues the permits for the sequestration wells, isn't that correct?
Yes.
So they don't do any of the inspections to make sure of that casing?
I don't know.
Could you tell us how negatively surface farm ground would be impacted by sequestration?
Well, I think the first thing is if it, by the wells itself, or
Yes.
in the immediate area, there's considerable disruption of the land surface.
By
By your mud pits, the general drilling, the storage of the materials, site preparation. It's just not a little hole in the ground. It covers acres in the process of drilling one of these wells.
Could you tell us what?
Before you go on, just a quick question. So one understands that the construction process would be rather messy and large.
Very large.
For the continued maintenance of that,
Yes.
is the footprint shrink? Or do they still require a large footprint on the surface to maintain and
Okay,
do safety?
They would maintain a footprint, probably not as large as the initial footprint, but it still would be acres in size.
Could you tell us what could be done to mitigate against that?
I don't know.
Could you tell us whether additional farm ground around that sequestration well would be negatively impacted by CO2?
I know excess of CO2 will damage the plants. That's all I know.
Would that be when it's leaking?
Yes.
If it's not leaking, would the surface farm ground be impacted other than just around the construction of the well and the storage of the materials and so forth?
I can't answer that.
The reason I'm asking is because some of the testimony that was given today is they're concerned about damaging the good farm ground in the area. And my question to you is it likely that much of the farm ground in McLean County would be negatively impacted by sequestration?
I think there would be some impact. I don't know how extensive. I think it would be closely related to the footprint of the pipeline or the sequestration well. I don't see, in other words, I think it is a proximal rather than a distal risk.
And because the pipeline would impact a larger area, it would have more impact, do you think?
Yes.
And are you aware that the ICC regulates the location and permitting of pipelines, is that correct?
Yes.
I have nothing else, thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? Member Metzger, please.
Thank you for your presentation today. You have said a couple of times that the CO2 is heavier. That's assuming that there's only CO2 that will be pumped through this well. But if there are other contaminants, potentially, how could, and you may not be able to answer this because you may not be a gas specialist, but you can't necessarily say that all of that gas is going to stay down there unless it's all CO2. Is that correct?
I would assume that if it's other things, it might be other types of gases that may not stay there. But I don't know. It's out of my area of expertise.
But from a geology perspective, when there are gases and there are fissures within the areas of this well, then those gases could potentially escape into those fissures.
Yes.
So as a land,
that's how your gas storage works.
so as a landowner, if my land is right next to this and I have not given them permission to put gas into my property, they cannot guarantee to contain that. Is that accurate? They cannot guarantee that it would never get on my property.
No, I can't guarantee, they couldn't guarantee that.
And the same thing would be, they can't guarantee that this escape could not occur into the aquifer or even wells that belong to municipalities. Is that accurate?
I'm trying to visualize, in other words, is it from the escape of the sequestration well?
Correct.
I don't know where the gas would go, so I can't answer the question.
But we can't contain it, is what you're saying.
If there's something that is in the ground that is outside of what they think of what the container should be, or if there's a different pathway it could take, it could go anywhere. But the likelihood is that it would go down because of the density of the critical CO2.
Thank you.
Dr. Nelson, I'm curious on the physical size of the well. I'm used to a water well being 6 inches bore. Is this ADM well, is it a 12-inch bore?
Oh,
How physically the size of the well?
well, you've got a production casing that's 9 inches.
Okay,
And you can see on the diagram in here that, each time you go up, you've got 14 inches, 16 inches. Some of the surface casing gets up to 30 inches.
how thick is that casing? Half inch? Do you know that?
I don't know.
Okay. So at the top, at the very top of the surface, it could be like 30-inch diameter.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dr. Nelson, thank you for being here. Can you go back to the slide that showed Market Street and Western Avenue? That would have been in the beginning.
Yeah, trying to get it there. It's not responding. Okay, there.
Okay. Over 100 years ago, that area was used for coal. There's a lot of coal mines on that side of, west side of Bloomington. One of the reasons that they stopped mining it, the coal, was that it was soft coaled. And soft coal gives off a lot of smoke, and it was not a very productive coal. So what I'm asking is, all those mines that are underneath, could they be affected in some way in the shift of doing things if we start getting into fracking? Excuse me. I just want to know, how deep does these mines go in relative to harder bedrock?
Okay, they are kind of sandwiched in some harder bedrock, but you can see that it's about 450 feet deep where these seams are. And when they were mined, they did what was called long wall retreat. They would go out to the edge and then work their way back and allow things to collapse behind them as support. So we don't, no. Yes. Yeah, there was a main shaft. They ran out, they put an air shaft in, and then they would mine back.
This kind of technology is pretty new to me, and I heard one of the public commenters, I think, say something like 80% of the pipelines or projects have been a failure. So can you tell us, how new is this technology? How long has it been in use? How many pipelines for CO2 and sequestration wells are there currently, and do we know their current rate of failure or success at this time?
The only well I'm aware of is the ADM. I know that there are other ones, but this is the only one that I'm aware of.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nelson. This is, we learned a lot, and this will, I'm sure you'll get future questions from us, but we appreciate your expertise.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. So the next item on our agenda is the building and zoning permit summary. Do you have anything to share with us?
I have nothing to add.
Okay. So our next committee meeting is 9 a.m. on Tuesday, March the 7th. Are there any other items for information or any comments that the members want to make? Well, with that, I will adjourn the meeting and appreciate everyone's time and attention.